Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're chatting with Dr. Brian MacDonald, a psychologist, nerd, and content creator for the awesome channel Brains on Games. Brian, welcome to the binge. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, James.
It is fantastic having you on. I'm glad you agreed to come on. It's long overdue, actually, as we were just saying before we went on air. I've followed your channel for a number of years now. You've done content for us as well, which has been really cool. And man, it's always awesome to have someone on the podcast who's a content creator that has a very, very unique hook that you have. And we're going to get into that as we get into this episode. But first, let me start off. I did call you Dr. Brian in the intro. So for those who don't know, maybe you can tell us kind of what the doctor part is all about.
Right, not a medical doctor. Some would say not a real doctor, but no, I'm a guy with a PhD. I'm a psychologist. My practice focuses on, right now, it's all assessment, testing and diagnosis of kids who are having trouble at school. So I do a lot of testing for learning problems, IQ tests and memory and problem solving and things like that. A lot of the same skills that we practice when we play the board games that I also like to do in my spare time. But yeah, I graduated from University of Ottawa in 2000, and I've been a psychologist in schools and treatment centers, and now I'm in private practice.
Oh, wow. And now, is there a certain age range that you focus on at all?
Usually six up to, well, university age.
Okay,
Sometimes there's
wow.
still assessments to be done at the university age. I don't have tests for kids under six, although there's some assessment things that sometimes need to be done for 4 and 5 year olds. But primarily, yeah, it's usually grade school kids. But I do sometimes work with older, well, young adults, I guess you'd say.
And when you're doing your assessments, is this something that is the kind of across the board to kind of see who falls in what kind of bucket? Or is it more needs based where someone identifies, hey, there seems to be some learning challenges here, or they're learning in a different way than maybe other students. Can we get them tested? Like, how do you usually come in on these?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely needs based. Usually it's a teacher who will say to a parent, "Oh, there's something going on with reading or math or there's something with handwriting, and we've tried this and this and this, and it seems like they might need some extra help." And here where I live, the schools, in order to give extra support or to individualize a program for kids, they need to have something from a psychologist saying, "Try
Mm.
this and this and this." And so that's been my job. I do a few of those every week.
Oh my gosh! And I'll say you're a fellow Canadian as well, so let's get that out there. I always Team Canada always love to have fellow Canucks
Yeah.
on the podcast. So, and we're both in the same province, which is amazing. And so so in this practice, you're dealing with for the most part kids and trying to get them set up for success. I guess is the best way to describe it, right? This is to
Yeah.
to help them best position themselves to be successful in life. Once the testing is done, kind of where does it go from there? Are you kind of out at that point, or is there further involvement, or how does that work?
When I first started, I was doing a lot more of the follow-up and ongoing therapy or counseling,
Mm,
and working with families and parents a lot more beyond just the assessment and diagnosis part. I was partnered up with another psychologist when I first opened up the practice, and his focus was assessment only. And then he retired, and his practice transferred to me, and I just haven't had time to do the counseling and therapy stuff. Really, things started to shift with the pandemic, I think.
yeah.
My partner retired in 2017. I still had some counseling cases that were ongoing, and a few new people would come in now and again. And then the pandemic happened, and there were no longer, for some time, there were no longer in-person meetings, and things started to kind of move towards zone out. And kids were learning at home, and there were so many issues with things going on with at home, and parents were seeing more of things. Oh, the teacher kind of mentioned something, but now I'm really seeing, it's really hard to focus when they're just looking at a screen or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
or they're hearing them read out loud more and wondering, oh, it sounds like there's something here that seems to be harder than it should be. And then I mean, my waiting list went from a 6 week waiting list to a 6 month waiting list in pretty short order.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you find with COVID? Because I mean, I've got a lot of friends. My kids were in high school going through COVID, and I've got a lot of friends that had kids that were at much younger ages, and I'm hearing often from them that even where there's not necessarily a medical or the kind of learning disability per se, there's a almost like a certain band or age group of kids that where having that kind of in-person one-on-one learning is so critical to early development, miss that because it went to like a home environment and online. Are you seeing that in your practice at all? Like, is there a group coming through that aren't necessarily is more of a function of or a symptom of COVID in that kind of environment versus actually being a learning disability itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to be seeing the impact of COVID for
Yeah.
years and years before we really know, what was the full impact of that at-home learning. I mean, I feel for my kids were older too. One was in university; he was already out of the house. The other guy was just graduating from high school, and he had a really hard final year of school, just being at home and not being social and not being able to see his friends really very much.
Yeah.
And so the social part was a real challenge. I feel for those parents who, parents are working full time and then they have their kids at home full time and then have to try and juggle, I'm doing my Zoom meeting and who's going to supervise this little one who's supposed to, grade one kids aren't just going to sit unsupervised and do their math homework.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, you need to be with them and doing things with them. So yeah, I think that there's been um, a group of kids who were really affected by not having that in-person contact with a teacher and with their classmates. And there was, I mean, I'm hearing more in Ontario. They're talking about this a lot. Some recent, not recent, but some ongoing research about the science of reading and how phonics instruction is so important. And the schools had moved away from phonics, and
Yeah.
now the Ministry of Education is bringing it back. So there's that factor too, where you have to evaluate, well, what's been the educational experience here? In a way that's probably even more detailed than it used to be when I first started doing this work, when you could kind of assume everybody was sort of on relatively a similar page.
That's interesting, like the whole changing curriculum, right? And how that can impact learning as well. I mean, math would be a good example of this. I find when my kids were going through school, right, where kids are being let they're using calculators, right, in like
Yeah.
grade 3 and stuff like that, instead of drilling in the fundamentals of times tables and things like that, right? And I know there's different philosophies on which ones are better, but just that change, I guess, is
Oh,
the point, right? And how that can cause disruption. And then even being a parent, trying to help your kids, but you learned one way and they're being learned they're learning a completely different way, it becomes a challenge as well, right?
yeah. I mean, I remember my son's grade 3 math was asking questions like, why does this plus this equal that? How do you explain that? That's just what it is. And I'm like, gee, I went to university for a long time and I can't figure out grade 3 math anymore. What's going on here? So they totally changed it. So, you have to recognize that too. The poor parents aren't necessarily in the loop on how they're being taught at school. And then the kids come home with work that I remember sometimes I would just look at it like, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. And then
Yeah.
I had to go back to the drawing board and relearn grade 3 or grade 4.
That's awesome. And so with your gaming, was this something that was ever kind of incorporated in your practice at all? Or is gaming been something that's kind of been to the side as a passion in your life?
Well, I mean, I was always a gamer for as long
Yeah.
as I can remember. I mean, it did come in to play at work. If I was working with a child who was really shy or somebody who was having trouble talking, with grown-ups, if it's like some issue with anxiety or something that sometimes like just playing a game would break the ice. Sometimes having a child teach me a game would just help them to feel comfortable. Sometimes when you've had kids who are kind of not really enthusiastic about leaving their basement and leaving their computer, you could play a board game with them and they'd be like, "Oh, wait, I didn't even know there were games like this," and then they wanted to play with their mom or their dad or so often it would be kind of an icebreaker or like a way of sort of structuring an interaction so that you could talk to a child and they wouldn't be so nervous about talking to you. Sometimes, as I started playing more of those modern games, there's so much kind of overlap with the skills that I test and the things that you're doing in those games. Usually all the research is being done on chess, but yeah, there's a lot of different skills that are being practiced by playing these. I mean, dexterity games are a great example. I always think of dexterity games as being, something that requires you to do a lot of the things that psychologists try and get their clients to do in therapy. What do you have to do when you're playing Jenga? You can't be impatient. You get instant feedback if you're too impulsive.
Mm.
You have to very carefully, you have to have some body awareness. You have to control your breathing. All these things that we try and help people to do when they're learning to deal with stress or working in a high pressure environment. So I found that there was a lot of overlap between what I was playing in games at home and what I was trying to help kids learn how to do in the work that I was doing. And I started recommending games to parents.
Oh my gosh. I never even thought of it that way, but you're right. Like just when you're kind of describing Jenga, right? Like, yeah, like it's not just kind of reaching and grab a piece, like the tower's gone, right? Like it's a
Yeah,
lot of concentration. And I mean, I have super shaky hands, so I can never be a surgeon for one. And
right.
any kind of dexterity games, I find like it takes a lot of concentration. I think the most recent one I've played is this tiny heist, I think it's called, where you have sticks with little hands on it. I don't know if you've seen
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
It is hilarious, but the same
Yeah.
thing, you're trying, like, just the dexterity of it, right, and the concentration and the breathing and so forth. Has this translated into gamification in the education system at all? Like, is there been a movement towards using games to teach more so now than maybe in the past? Are you seeing?
I mean, I think that there is some of that. I used to work in school, so I was a school psychologist for 15 years. And
Wow.
and so I was there, I was in the classroom, I was seeing what kinds of things that they were getting up to. And there were I know there was some gamification of some of those activities, some of the learning opportunities there. The kids always loved it when the teacher would make a game out of it. And let's be honest, you learn more from playing
Yeah.
and fooling around with things than you do from, listening to a lecture about it. So I think the kids always did like that. Now, what's happening in the classroom now? I know there's a lot of tech in the classroom,
Yeah.
and I don't know how much are they using that to sort of gamify some of this stuff because you're earning rewards by getting past this lesson, but it's a computer administered lesson. I prefer it to be face to face rather than online. I would want, it's the social interaction piece and
Yeah.
being with the other person. I think that's the most important. And when I was doing therapy, I would often, and I still sometimes get this question, even though I'm not really working so much as a therapist anymore. My kid doesn't want to turn off their computer. They're on a video game all the time. Oh, they're addicted to Fortnite, or Roblox is a big one. You hear about all of these games all the time. I sort of get to be in the know about what the most popular games are with the kids. But how do you get a kid to turn off the screen? And I always said, well, it's one thing to tell your child to turn off their computer and find something to do, but it's a different thing when you say, let's turn off the computer and come with me and we're going to do something
Yeah.
together, right? And that's where I honestly, that's what I started, was trying to get my son off the video games. And that's when I started trying to find things that would kind of appeal to him and were maybe game-like enough that he would want to, okay, well, I can shut this off and I'll come and hang out with dad for half an hour. And now his friends come and do the same thing. Instead of going off to, there was one New Year's Eve. All of these 19-year-olds, instead of going off to a New Year's Eve party, they came to my place so that I could teach them. We played Scythe.
Oh my God. That's hilarious.
I guess I have nerdy kids with nerdy friends,
Well, it's
maybe.
a
I don't
safer
know.
environment too, right? Like I think, I mean, that's the one thing I really like about this hobby is it, especially, and you're in Ontario as well. It says, they got rid of grade 13, right? So kids are graduating, going into university at a much younger age. I think my
Mhm.
youngest was 17 when she went into university her first year. That's crazy young, right? From my perspective versus when I had graduated high school. And, I know at her age, they're often looking for things they can do that you can legally do, right? Like you can't go to a bar if you're 17. You have to try to find an underage
Hmm.
bar and things like that. So their first 2 years of university were spent hanging at each other's houses and playing games and things like this, right? And just finding different types of social events to do. And I think this industry has been really helpful in that regards. That it's really opened up a whole area where people can get involved in a social atmosphere that doesn't involve having to have alcohol and things like that. It almost gives like another avenue, right? And I know meetups are very important, very popular here in Ontario. Right, so you go on the Meetup app and you can find. I mean, I run one myself here in the Barrie area where anybody literally in the public can come in and join our gaming group one night, and it's at a local restaurant, so it's easy and accessible, and it's not as intimidating as going to someone's house, because I know I've been to some of those in the past where there's a meetup and it's like it's actually at someone's house, and if you have any kind of social anxiety, that's a barrier, right? But having a public place you can go to, I think is helpful as well. So it's cool. It's a cool time, I guess, what I'm saying, to be in this industry, and it's so awesome to see how it's kind of manifested itself over the past 10, 15 years. What would you say was kind of your lead in into? Did you have a gateway game? Was there something that kind of pulled, like, because I know we all, our age group, always Monopoly and Risk and all those, the classics from like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But then the modern hobby came, and was there a particular game that pulled you in at all, or?
Well, I remember when I was a kid, the game that I thought was just the coolest was Mousetrap, because you're
Mm,
building that crazy Rube Goldberg machine as you're playing through this game, and then you get to activate something and watch this whole thing play out. I almost didn't care who won. You just wanted to see the cage go down at the end
yeah.
and trap the player. So I remember playing Mousetrap, and then I grew up in New Brunswick, and I lived in a small town, and so we didn't have there was no gaming store
Yeah.
or anything like that. You had to drive 2 hours to get to like a comic book store or a gaming store. Somebody gave me the red box D&D set.
Okay.
I still have those blue dice with the white crayon that
Yeah.
you had to color in the numbers on them. Yeah, and then I started playing role-playing games, and then I got a I got into the Decipher collectible card game when I was in university. So I was role-playing games all through my undergrad, and then I was doing a PhD, and I was getting married and moving to a new town, and we weren't playing a lot of games. But then this Decipher Star Wars collectible card game came out, and then it was HeroClix from there, and then Star Wars minis. And then now I've sort of moved away from mostly from the miniatures games, and it's more Euro games that I'm playing now. Fromage was my game of the year. I just thought that was a
I
real,
saw your review. Yeah,
yeah.
I backed that game as well. Absolutely loved it.
Oh,
Just so
it's
well
just
done.
there's something about it, right? Like
Yeah.
just everything seemed well thought out. The art was just yeah, just a great game.
Yeah, it was quite clever for me. Like I always geek out over like an innovation or like a thing in a game that's kind of unique to a game, or brings something new to the industry. And the way they age the cheese in that game, so the way your cheese is, as how your marker's facing, dictates the round that it's going to age, how it basically turns, I thought was just so clever. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big fan of their company. I have a few of their games. One of my favorite is actually it was the space-based one. I can't try to think what the name of it is. After Nova, I think it's called, where
Okay.
you're mining on a planet, and you're having to negotiate with other people to get them to go mining with you. So it's quasi kind of cooperative, but obviously you're still trying to have the most points at the end of the game to win. They're cool dudes. I absolutely love them, and so that game for me was a natural back with your channel. So like, and that's a good example of a game you talk about on your channel. Can you talk a little bit about the hook that you came up with for your whole Brains on Games? So what was the idea behind Brains on Games when you created this channel?
Okay. Well, it started during the pandemic because I went from Um, I was maybe playing games well, a couple of times a month, maybe.
Yeah.
I'd pull something out with the kids, or somebody would come over and we'd play, Seven Wonders or something. But I was working 6 days a week and I was running Spartan races. So I was training at the gym and
Okay.
doing all
Wow.
of this nonsense. And then the pandemic happened and I went from being busy every single day from
Yeah.
the moment I opened my eyes to the moment I went to bed to having nothing that I could possibly do. And I was really getting antsy
Yeah.
and restless. And I was like, well, what can I do? I was trying to think of, well, what do I like that I don't have to invite somebody from outside my bubble to engage in some activity, and it was board games. So then I was thinking, okay, well maybe I can learn a new skill while I'm sitting at home and I can't work. And so I thought, well, I'll put up a YouTube video. And the first one was in my son's room. I was just sitting in a recliner
Yeah.
with the wall behind me saying, here's what I was using, like AirPods as my mic. And then somebody sent me a game. And I thought, wow, I get to try out some new things and learn about all of these. I had quite a few games, but not like I do now. I'm looking
Yeah.
over at my shelf and it's overflowing. I think I'm going to have to do a purge at some point. But I did want to think, okay, I like board games. I love playing games with the kids. This is going to be a way for me to kind of to kind of not force them, but to motivate them maybe to come out and do a game night once a week and learn a new game. And then I there's so many people who review games, and what do I have to offer that's even a little bit different from anybody else? It's that I'm a psychologist who does those assessments, so I know about all the IQ tests and the skills that we're measuring. So Brains on Games became at first a channel that was focused more on games that parents and younger kids would play together. But my son during the pandemic was in grade 11 and then grade 12. And so, I was playing games for teenagers most of the time in my spare time. The games I was looking for and bringing home were games for older kids, and
Mm.
it's kind of evolved, I guess, over the last 4 years. And now sometimes I'll play a party game. Usually it's more sort of medium weight. My favorite games right now are medium weight kind of Euros that are quick to teach and
Yeah.
easy to learn, but still you have to think about what you're doing to play them. We just played Forges of Ravenshire a few times with my son and his friends. So that's a great example of that kind of a game.
And then so each of your videos typically last, I think, what, like maybe half hour, 20 minutes to a half hour, maybe, are you really?
Yeah. A half hour would be a long one if it's a complicated game. I
Yeah.
think Obsession was the first one I remember. It was so complicated to put that together and edit it down to something that would be an hour. I really love that game, but it was, there's so many things happening in it, and um, yeah, some it depends on the game. Usually about 20 minutes, I would say.
Yeah.
I don't schedule it out as strictly as maybe I should. I don't have a script that I follow. I just sort of turn on the camera and talk about what I did this
Wow,
week.
that's impressive because your videos are they're well produced. And one of my favorite things I like to do when I have content creators on the podcast is I always go back to the first video that I can find on their channel, and I watch that, and then I compare that to kind of their latest video, and there's always an evolution, always, right? Unless you're talking to somebody like literally a month after they started their thing. Like, we're all in the same boat. You're just trying to figure it out. You're just throwing something up, seeing how, you're still kind of finding yourself and kind of what your message is going to be, and you kind of your brand, and then seeing it where that lands. It's super cool to see that transition, right? And your production value is quite high. I would say. I was complimenting on your lighting system, right? When I say when we are just off air there, like, I love like the hues and the colors cast on the back wall, and your camera quality and your audio, and just everything is so well done. So when you say just kind of turn on the camera and start talking, that surprises me because I'm expecting that you had some script or something, like some polished script that you kind of work through and stuff like that. So good for you to be able to create the content like that. Obviously edit it afterwards, but just to kind
Yeah,
of go. I find, other than when I do a live podcast and I'm just chatting with someone, which is super easy to do, like you're having a coffee with them, right? That's
yeah,
very different than when I try to do any kind of how to play videos, or when I'm trying to explain like a concept on like an actual video I want to post. or TikTok or things like that, like the amount of time and prep that goes into those, and the number of takes, just so you're not tripping over your own tongue. Like it is crazy when you become aware of what you're saying and you're focusing on what you're saying, how much that can almost become a barrier to actually talking in the first place, right?
Yeah, you really get in your head, I guess,
Yeah,
about what you're saying. So I shouldn't say I have no script at all. I do have a few bullet points, and it's just been a format that has been consistent enough that I kind of remember, okay, it's this, and this, and this, and I could go a little bit more from the top of my head. But usually I'm filming like a day or two after I played a game a bunch of
yeah,
times,
so
so
it's
I
fresh.
sort of know the ins and outs, and I have the rule book handy in case. And I do pause
Mm.
the camera and check sometimes if there's something I can't remember. I can't say I've never made a mistake in remembering or interpreting the rules on these things, but it's no, I have a really good time doing it. Um, and it's fun to edit it after the fact, and I
Yeah.
love playing with the lights and the gadgets. And I just the most recent thing that I picked up that I thought was well, really appealing to me anyway. It's this giant cage around the table that holds all of the lights and the gadgets. And it saves me about half an hour prep time because I don't really have a studio that's set up. I have to pull a table out every time.
Oh
And I
wow.
used to put chairs all around with pillows. And anyway,
And now you just have the thing come out and away you go, and it
it's
just
just
sets up.
there. I just pull a table out 6 inches and sit on a bench behind it, and then I can turn on the lights and get started. So it makes life a little bit easier, a little faster, I guess. I could spend more time thinking about the game and less about setting things up.
It's amazing how we naturally start creating shorthand in these types of things, right? When you do the same thing, you have that kind of repetition. It's almost like a natural human instinct, right? I think to say, okay, what can I automate here in this process? Whether it be the setup of the equipment, so I just pull it and drop it in, or whether it's the edit, or whether it's your scripting, or it's your format. It seems to be something that there's almost like this natural, and I don't know why we as people do this, but I guess I'm not sure if it's the value of time, or if it's the need for consistency, or what it is that actually drives the human need to try to create these kind of shorthands.
Well, I mean, we're creatures of habit, right? And
Yeah,
I think that's a part of it. I know for me, I want to spend the most time
yeah,
kind of polishing it after the fact. And I have to I have to keep keep myself limited, I guess, to the time I spend downstairs in the basement working on these videos because my wife is like, I have to be quiet for how long? You know, she'll as soon as she walks around, you can hear her on the microphone. So yeah, so she's willing to kind of do some work in the office for a little while of her own. Well, I'll record. It takes me probably only 45 minutes or so to record the video, but then
yeah.
it's like, hours in edits just trying to get everything just so to
Oh
make sure
yeah.
it looks okay and it sounds good.
I tell you, the during COVID, that was probably the hardest part, right? Was being able to grab moments of silence, right, when you're recording, like when you got a house full of people, like
Mhm.
who aren't allowed to leave, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah, nobody could go
it's
anywhere.
absolutely crazy. So when you're working with publishers and they send you like a game, how does that process work? So for other people out there, maybe looking at getting into content creation, reviews, and things like that, how do you how do you connect with publishers? And like I know myself, I found you and reached out to you, but is that the exception to the rule, or is it like a dialogue you have with the community, or how do you kind of find these publishers games, and kind of what does that whole process work? How does that work?
I mean, that was a huge learning curve, I
Mm,
think, for me, because I didn't have any connections in the industry. I didn't know anyone
yeah.
who was producing games. I just had some games on my shelf, and I was an avid gamer and maybe slightly addicted to Kickstarter. And so, so I would have new things coming in that maybe people would be interested in hearing about. I started really, there was a Facebook group, reviewers in media, board game
Mm,
reviewers in media group.
yep.
And every once in a
Great
while, a
group.
publisher or a social media relations person would post something. Oh, we have this coming up, or we have review copies available of that. And I put my hat in the ring, and sometimes somebody would trust me enough to send me something. Uh, every once in a while, I would get a contact from a publisher, and that's starting to happen a little bit more often now. It's like I don't know if it's the we're almost coming up to the 5-year birthday or anniversary of when I
Yeah.
started doing this thing. So So more often I'm getting in contact with folks from the industry or who have seen, I purchased one of their games and did a review of it just because I thought it was neat, or, I expected I was going to like it. I wanted to play it with my son or my friends. And so then they might get in touch with me after that. Now just this past year, this is pretty new. I started I've been to a couple of conventions. There was Breakout in Toronto
Yep.
that I attended in March, and then Ludicon in November, and I met some publishers and designers at those things. So I brought business cards with a link to the channel on it and just handed them around to anyone and everyone I met. And I got in touch with KTPG through Breakout, and with Inside Up Games
Mm.
and Asmodee. I met the rep from Asmodee and somebody from Flyos when I was in Montreal. So now there's a little bit more of a personal connection because you can meet them face to face when they attend those conventions. So I mean, I enjoy a con for sure, and going away on a trip for a weekend is always a good time. But
Oh yeah.
you get to combine it with the board gaming stuff and promote the channel a little bit at the same time. So yeah, I started by reaching out to people online, and by purchasing a game that I wanted to talk about. Because I mean, even now, I don't get every single game as a review copy. Most of the time, the games that I'm reviewing are games that I backed on Kickstarter, or
Yeah.
Fromage is one of those. Tiny Epic Game of Thrones was another one. There's a few games I can't resist. I might have a problem.
Yeah, I think we all do. But I'm going to recap what you said, because there's three key things you said there that for someone else who's maybe looking at getting into content creation, the first board game reviewers in media Facebook group, I'm part of that group as well. It's got thousands of members. There are publishers posting there all the time saying, "Hey, I'm looking for someone for people to do reviews on a particular game." Sometimes they have digital copies, sometimes they have physical copies. So that's a great way to network. Two, going to conventions, which I think you said it was, again, that's another great way to network with publishers in the industry, right? And the key thing here is network, network, network. You have to build a network in this industry if you want to get into either being a publisher, a designer, or even a content creator. And the third
Yeah.
one that you said, and this one I kind of narrowed in on, because where you said you just had a game that you really liked and you did a video on it, and someone, people see that and they're like, oh, this guy does content, and I like his content, maybe I can reach out and form a relationship. I literally just did that with a content creator on my latest game, Cities of Venus Survivors. They had been one of the backers on the first game, Cities of Venus Lost Contact, and I just happened to come across a video they did. I didn't ask them to do a review. They just got the game because they were a backer and a fan of the concept. And they just did a review on their channel. I really liked their content. So I reached out and I'm like, hey, do you want to be involved in the second Chronicle and do a review of that? And they're like, oh my God, that'd be awesome. And we formed a connection that way. So there are very distinct paths you can take in this industry if you want to get into content creation. I still think there's lots of, and we're talking about this just off air, I think there's still room for more people to jump in. I don't think the industry is fully tapped. I think there's always room for new content creators to come in with people that have something they want to say and a story to tell. And it seems to be quite a welcoming industry at that. So, anybody out there that's looking at doing this, I strongly encourage you, if you had the idea of doing content creation, just give it a try. Throw yourself out there. You got nothing to lose. You really don't. For your channel, have you thought about kind of where you want to go from here? Like, is it just kind of just keep rolling with what you got, or have you actually mapped out, maybe in 3 years I'd like to do this or do that? Or
Well, one thing that I'd like to do going forward is more, things like this. I'd
yeah.
love to have another person on every once in a while to chat with them about whatever game it is that we played this week. It's because I live sort of in a rural area. We only recently got an internet connection that would support something like that.
Mm,
Video calls were challenging and not very high resolution until recently, and now I can do those things, and that's sort of the next thing I'm starting to think about. Do I want to have a second person on once in a while? Do I want to do maybe a playthrough of a game with somebody? Things like that
yeah.
are currently what I'm thinking about. Again, I'm heading back to some cons, and I am always excited to meet new people at conventions, and so that's another thing I'm looking forward to doing
Are you going
in the
back to
coming
Breakout
year.
this year?
Going back to Breakout.
Oh,
Yeah, I've
nice.
got my hotel room already booked.
Well, I'm sure people, you've got a very iconic look, and are you going to have like a logo shirt or anything on so people can recognize you?
Yeah, I'll wear the sweater so people can recognize me. They'll
I
see
think I
that
saw from
logo.
last year you're all masked up, so you're a little incognito. I think last year, right, because of the
I was a
protocols.
little sneaky about it. Yeah, because we still had, yeah, we were still, it wasn't really lockdown, but we were still in quite a great big crowd of people. So I
Yeah,
was
that's
trying to be
true.
a little bit careful last year, probably less so this year. I escaped without getting sick. I was not so lucky at Ludicon.
Oh God, yeah, it's so easy, right, when you're in crowds that are that big. But sometimes it's worth the risk, right? For your passion, you gotta go where the games are and where the people are. So, for those who
Absolutely.
want to check out your channel, I'm going to put a link in the show notes. Simply just go on YouTube, type in Brains on Games. You'll find it. It pops up right away. Might even be in your recommended videos that pop up if you're in the board game industry. I'm sure you've probably come across Brian's content. Brian, I want to wish you all the best in this coming year. I am a big fan of your channel, and I can't wait to see what you have coming next, my friend.
Thanks so much for having me on, James.
No worries. You take care. Cheers.
You too.
This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply subscribe to our YouTube channel, Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.